Now we have Robin's exclusive interview with Ozzy Osbourne. Robin, he really wanted to open up about the challenges he's been facing.
The stage lights pulsed with fury, the crowd roaring like a tsunami as Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness himself, stepped into view. For a moment, time paused. Here was the man who had defined generations of heavy metal, who had faced demons both literal and figurative, now poised to ignite yet another explosive performance. But something was different. Behind the trademark theatrics and the booming voice lay a tremor not born from excitement, but from struggle. It was the beginning of a tragedy that no one had fully seen coming, yet one that had been quietly building for decades. The story of Ozzy Osbourne's fall is not one of a singular event, but a series of moments, silent, aching, invisible, that formed a heartbreakingly human tale masked beneath the sound and fury of fame. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Ozzy Osbourne was never meant to be ordinary. From the earliest days with Black Sabbath, he possessed a presence that felt magnetic and dangerous, like something conjured from a darker corner of the universe. His voice, raw and haunting, cut through the noise of the 1970s like a blade. But while the world saw a rock legend, the man behind the music was already battling shadows. Drugs, alcohol, mental instability, these weren't accessories to the rock star life. They were chains wrapped tight around his spirit. And yet for decades, Ozzy carried them all while never dropping the curtain. He was the madman on stage, the father on TV, the haunted soul still producing chart-topping albums. It wasn't just that he survived, it was how spectacularly he did so. But that survival came at a cost. Long before the public would begin to notice the signs, Ozzy was enduring the first tremors of neurological decline. Decades of substance abuse had ravaged his body in ways that couldn't be undone, and while the spectacle remained intact, his balance, speech, and memory were quietly deteriorating. The first glimpses were subtle. Missed cues during concerts, slurred interviews that seemed more concerning than eccentric, difficulty standing for extended periods. For many fans, these were brushed off as quirks of age or remnants of his wild youth. But the reality was crueler. His body was beginning to betray him, piece by painful piece. Even as his physical strength waned, Ozzy refused to let go of the stage. He fought to perform, even when it meant enduring excruciating pain and visible discomfort. Watching him in those later performances felt like witnessing a legend wage war against time itself. There was something both noble and devastating in that effort. He wasn't just battling illness. He was fighting to preserve the very identity that had defined his existence for more than half a century. And in that struggle, he laid bare the human core behind the myth. The loudest screams, the wildest stunts, the blood and bats, all of it now existed alongside the frailty of a man who had given everything to a stage that no longer welcomed him without a price. One of the most tragic aspects of Ozzy's decline was how it stripped him of the parts of life that had once given him joy without spectacle. No longer was it just about canceled tours or postponed albums. His body began to limit his ability to do the everyday things that once grounded him, taking a walk without help, sitting through a family dinner without fatigue, remembering the names and places that once came effortlessly. The icon who had once seemed indestructible was now facing a very mortal unraveling. And through it all, there was a haunting irony. This was not a punishment for recklessness, but the final toll of having given so much of himself to a world that cheered as he tore himself apart on stage. The world that had celebrated every excess of Ozzy's persona now had to reckon with its consequences. Fans who had once cheered the chaos were left in disbelief at the toll it had taken. But even more painful was the realization that many of those chaotic moments weren't born from joy or rebellion. They were cries for help, masked behind showmanship. Ozzy's descent into addiction had never truly been glamorous. It had been brutal, lonely, and self-destructive. What looked like fearlessness was often numbness. And now, as the long-term damage manifested with every faltering step and trembling hand, the illusion of invincibility shattered completely. What made this tragedy even more poignant was Ozzy's deep yearning to continue. He did not want to fade quietly into the background. Every canceled show was a heartbreak, not just for fans, but for him. Each moment off stage felt like a piece of him slipping away. Music wasn't just a career, it was his lifeline, his therapy, his voice in a world that often didn't know what to do with someone like him. To see that lifeline fray under the weight of illness was to witness something fundamentally cruel. He was being forced to step back, not because he wanted to, but because his body no longer gave him a choice. Yet even amid the sorrow, Ozzy remained as much a symbol as he was a man. His pain was real, but so was his defiance. Watching him navigate interviews while struggling to find words or appear in public while clearly battling physical discomfort evoked a different kind of admiration, one rooted not in fame, but in resilience. Still, there was something undeniably heartbreaking about the contrast between who he had been and who he was becoming. For fans who had grown up with his music, this was more than the aging of a celebrity. It felt like the slow erosion of a cultural monument. There is a particular kind of grief that comes when legends grow old. It is not just the sorrow of seeing a life diminish, but the disorientation that follows when an icon's power begins to fade. With Ozzy, this grief is compounded by the knowledge that much of what ailed him was preventable. The years of excess, the ignored warnings, the punishing schedules, all of it contributed to a situation that might have been different if the systems around him had cared more for his health than his brand. His tragedy is not isolated. It echoes the fates of many artists chewed up by an industry that rarely knows when to stop pushing. There is also the tragic beauty in how much he wanted to give. Ozzy didn't owe anyone more performances. He didn't owe the world more music or more television appearances. And yet, he kept trying, kept showing up, even when it hurt. That kind of commitment doesn't come from ego. It comes from a deep need to connect, to still matter in a world that can be quick to move on. In that way, Ozzy's tragedy is also a universal one. The fear of becoming irrelevant, of being forgotten, of watching the world spin forward without you. Even as the physical signs became impossible to ignore, Ozzy never let go of his identity. He still dressed the part, still carried that unmistakable air of gothic grandeur, still cracked jokes that were both bizarre and endearing. But there was a fatigue behind his eyes that couldn't be hidden. The spark remained, but it flickered more now, threatened by the weight of years and ailments that no costume or charisma could fully conceal. Fans clung to those last performances like relics, aware that each might be the final one. And through it all, the tragedy deepened, because Ozzy's decline wasn't just about him. It mirrored the slow disintegration of an era, of a way of life where rock gods roamed freely and music was as dangerous as it was liberating. Watching Ozzy fade was to watch the curtain fall on a time that felt mythic. He wasn't just a performer. He was a living reminder of a world that no longer existed. The heartbreak wasn't just about what he was losing, it was about what the world was losing with him. The sadness also lies in how misunderstood Ozzy had often been. Dismissed by critics, caricatured by tabloids, and reduced to a reality TV persona, many missed the depth of his emotional and artistic contributions. Beneath the theatrics was a deeply sensitive man, struggling with depression, anxiety, and the traumas of a rough childhood and a relentless career. He was more than a performer. He was a survivor of circumstances that would have broken most. His tragedy is compounded by the realization that his pain was often commodified, turned into entertainment, even as it silently eroded him from the inside. There's something haunting about watching a man so deeply entwined with darkness become a victim of it in real time. Ozzy had built an empire on his flirtation with the macabre, but now, the real darkness was internal, neurological, emotional, inescapable. It wasn't something he could banish with a scream or a solo. It was something that crept through his nerves, slowed his speech, and wore down his memory. The final villain wasn't one of his own creation. It was time, biology, and the relentless grind of a life lived too hard for too long. And still, despite the pain, despite the mounting toll, Ozzy never quite gave up. That refusal to surrender gave his tragedy a certain nobility. It wasn't a collapse, it was a slow, painful resistance. A long goodbye where every moment was wrung for meaning. There is something uniquely powerful about a person who continues to fight even after the war seems lost. But it also makes the tragedy that much sharper, because the fight itself becomes a source of pain and the audience, once cheering, now watches with concern more than awe. His story forces uncomfortable questions. How much should someone give for their art? How far can a body be pushed before it begins to unravel? And what do we as fans demand from the people we idolize? Ozzy Osbourne's life invites reflection not just on his legacy, but on the culture that both exalted and exploited him. His tragedy is not his alone. It is shared by all who watched and cheered and asked for more, even when there was less and less of him to give. What makes Ozzy's story so heartbreaking isn't simply that he's ill or aging. It's that for so long, he gave everything, his mind, his health, his heart, to a dream that rarely gave back the care he needed. The applause was deafening, but the silence in its absence was brutal. And through all of it, he remained profoundly human, a man trying to hold on to himself in a world that kept asking him to be more than anyone could reasonably be. Ozzy Osbourne's tragedy is the kind that lingers long after the last note fades. It's not a clean break, but a slow, aching unraveling. It is filled with echoes of past glories, haunted by what could have been, and illuminated by the fierce, fragile determination of a man who tried to defy fate. It is a story of brilliance and breakdown, of applause and absence, of light and the long shadows it leaves behind. In the quiet moments away from the spotlight, the weight of Ozzy's journey settles most heavily. The silence that once followed roaring crowds now feels sharper, more final. There are no theatrics left to mask the vulnerability, just the stark reality of a life spent chasing sound, now shadowed by fragility. Each breath, each movement becomes a testament to endurance, not performance. What remains is not a fading legend, but a man forged in noise, now navigating stillness. And in that stillness lies the most profound ache of all, knowing he once commanded the world and now must simply learn to endure it. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Ozzy's tragedy? What do you expect will happen? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.